Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with Rachael Salter and Aimee Brown, who are both consultants with us here at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider Talk DP. So today we're going to be chatting about the other data protection rights that are afforded by the GDPR, aside from data subject access requests, which are often sort of the most spoken about. So my first question for you guys is, apart from DSARs, which data rights tend to unexpectedly consume business resources and why?
So that's a great question, Annie. So there are a number of enhanced rights. That's what we call them under the legislation. They're not a given right like the DSAR. So these are rights that the data subject can effectively request of a business, but it doesn't always mean that they'll get that right enhanced and that they will actually get what they want to have. So it is done on a case-by-case basis. So there's a number of them.
Which can take more resource as well.
Absolutely.
You can't do a more of a blanket approach.
Yeah, correct. Because it's case-by-case, sometimes people can put forward a compelling case to have something removed, for example, or erased. So like erasure. So do you want to talk about Article 17, right to be forgotten, Aimee? So in terms of an enhanced right.
Yeah, so data subject can request that the data is deleted by a business. A lot of the time it can come, again, on the back of a complaint, the same as the DSARs, or on the back of something happening that the data subject doesn't like there's a debt or something outstanding. They think that they can use the erasure as a way from that debt. But it can be quite challenging for businesses because it's finding all of that data. If that erasure can be done, it's looking on your backup systems, looking on your vendors' systems to make sure that everything is done in the right way. Then you've got the reasons that you wouldn't do an erasure. So you've got other regulatory compliance that you need to think of, like tax or legal obligations that you need to abide by. And if you are going to decline a request for an erasure, you really need to have a very clear explanation as to why you're doing that. It can't be vague or just because you don't want to delete the data. There really has to be a very clear explanation to comply with the regulation.
Yeah, and it's important, like Aimee said there, that there are other pieces of legislation that trump the GDPR. So, someone could make a request to have some financial records deleted off a business system, but actually, because it's a financial record, the financial regulations kick in, which say that they should be retained for a period of time, 6 plus the current financial year. So you couldn't ask someone to delete payroll records or tax records after 4 years because there is another piece of legislation that trumps the GDPR. So it isn't always straightforward. And Aimee mentioned as well about vendor systems. This is also really important because ultimately, if you are an organization that processes data and you have shared some of that data with your sub-processors, they will also have those data fields. And if someone's made a request to you to have that deleted, you need to pass that request for erasure down the line to the sub-processors and your other contractors, to ensure that they're also deleting that from the systems. So it's quite a hefty process. It's time-consuming. It's hard work. There's a lot of resource goes into this, a lot of research to find where data is. So it's quite complex. It's not easy. And the timescales are not amazing either, in terms of how long you've got to actually physically do this request. So that's erasure. The right to rectification. So this is around making sure that data is accurate on your systems. And, literally things like spelling someone's name wrong, date of birth being incorrect, maybe your location or something like that. An individual has an opportunity to ask you to rectify that record. You have to evidence that it is incorrect. Again, it's around everything's around finding where your information is in the business. That's the time-consuming thing, really, I think, for any business. Where is the data? How easy is it to get to that? How easy is it to make changes? I still work with a number of clients who have systems that still don't have a delete function, for example. So how do you do a right to rectification if you can't physically delete a record? So you may agree with the data subject that actually we should be deleting that record. We've held it for too long. It's appropriate to delete it. But actually, your software is so old, the system can't physically do that. So what does that look like, in terms of non-compliance?
Yeah, and I'm aware of a business that did that during the design process. It wasn't built into a new system. And so that's where your privacy by design kicks in, is that you need to be thinking of these things at the point of the system being created, because further down the line, when they realise that was a problem and these things couldn't be deleted, the cost implications for them to try and find a workaround or a change solution system and find the solution was exponential.
Even now, platforms are being built without delete functionality, which is crazy, or even rectification functionality. Once data's in the system, how do we make it correct? That can be tricky for a number of organisations. So rectification is another one. Restricting processing. So around the data subject, asking a company to stop processing for a short period of time whilst you rectify something. It sounds quite simple, quite straightforward, but it's not always easy. How do you stop automatic marketing material going out? How do you stop mail shots going out? How do you stop processing happening? And, when it's widespread across the business, it's really hard to restrict that.
Especially if you've allowed purpose creep. So if you've allowed information that you have about data subjects that was for marketing originally to end up in another function, and then they ask you to start restricting that. If you've not kept a track of where that data is being used, you can find it really tough.
Yeah, no, that is quite tricky. It's not straightforward. Probably one of the more interesting enhanced rights is data portability. So it's been around for a little while, and this is around being able to move someone's documentation, files, data sets, whatever it is, from one system to another. And it has to be in a particular format, in a machine-readable format for it to happen. This all came about many, many years ago when banks were encouraging you to move from one bank to another. And the advertisements on the TV were saying things like, come to us, come to Halifax, we'll move all your data, we'll transfer your standing orders and your direct debits over, you don't have to do anything. That was the birth of data portability, and making it easier for the data subject to get better quality service easily without the pain of going through moving all their information. So data portability has changed a little bit just recently with the new Data User Access Bill, because historically data portability was only able to happen if there was the consent of the individual to do that. What this has now done with the change that came around in June 25 is that we're now able to do data portability using something called legitimate interest. So there's a more flexible, lawful basis to enable us to do that. So that's a big change for businesses. I think there's going to be more of this happening going forward. It's an interesting time with the Data User Access Bill, because it is making some of the enhanced rights a little bit more friendly for the business than the actual user. So, for the data subject, it's more centric around businesses and how they're going to be able to implement these new enhanced rights. So that's an interesting one. Right to be informed. Do you want to talk about right to be informed?
Yeah, so privacy notices are a big, big part of what businesses should be doing to enable data subjects to know how they're processing their data or what they're doing with the data. And it's something that's quite often set aside or not really considered, but it's really, really important that it builds trust. It makes data subjects understand what you're doing, and therefore they are more likely to trust you. And it also then enables you to comply with your transparency principle as well.
Yeah, principle one.
That you're being honest and open about what you're doing with data and how you're processing it. But then the other thing that for companies that do actually do it is then they forget to update it. So when they're doing new purpose changes or they're putting new recipients in for the access, they're not thinking about the fact that they need to then update their privacy notice to reflect that, so that they're remaining transparent and keeping it open for the data subjects to understand.
One of the other things as well around privacy notices, certainly in my experience of working with a number of very large corporate clients, is that what we should be doing, we should be having granular privacy notices around different types of processing. I think a lot of organisations think that if they put a privacy notice on their website that says this is who we are, this is what we do, that's sufficient, but it isn't. And we encourage all of our clients to look at breaking down the processes that they have and actually writing a privacy notice specific to that function. So if you were a housing association, for example, and you suddenly decided to implement something around external services that you can provide to your tenant, which is outside of housing, you would have a privacy notice that says that this is what we do, this is who we're going to share data with. Every single process and function that is different to the original purpose for which the data was collected should have a new privacy notice that explains that to the data subject. There's a lot of laziness around this. It's very easy to find a privacy notice online. You Google it, you pinch someone else's, you edit it to fit your purpose. That's not the answer. And the ICO will take a dim view on that. So it's about tailoring it to your own individual organization's needs, what your purpose of the processing is, what your lawful basis is, because it could be different. You could process something under consent, you could process something else under contract, and you must make sure that you're reflecting that in your privacy notices. So whilst it seems like it's an obvious thing to do, and like Aimee said, it's around meeting the requirements of Principle 1, fairness and transparent processing, which is really important. There's more to it than just putting something on your website. So
it'll help you as a business understand what your data is and why you're using it as well. So if you're putting down the different legitimate, the legal basis for using that data, then you're understanding what data there is being processed. It's giving you a deeper knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Automated decision making as well. We've talked about that over the years quite a bit around AI and machine driven decisions. Again, historically, there's a reason why these things have been incorporated into the legislation. So automated decision making came around many years ago with computers giving a response to a question, mostly things like applying for loans online. So you put your information in, there's an algorithm in the system that says, this is how much money you earn, this is your bills, this is how much money you can borrow. The computer says yes or no, can you afford the loan? So again, 20 plus years we've been talking about automated decision making. So it's not a new thing. But a lot of our clients don't think they use it in quite the right way. They don't truly understand why it's there and what it's there to be used for. Obviously, AI is huge at the moment. Machines are making much more decisions for us. Historically, it was around things like loans, but now it's going to be around recruitment. So whether someone meets the basic requirement to even be shortlisted for an interview, for example. So there are benefits to a business in terms of cost saving because it will filter a number of things out of the way for you quite quickly.
And speed.
Yeah, much faster. Yes, it's almost like the algorithm's working. Do you meet the requirement? Yes or no? No, gone. This is your automatic rejection letter or whatever it might be. So speed and cost, huge benefits to an organisation, but not a great benefit to the data subject. So again, it's quite weighted towards the business. So you've got to think about with automated decision making, the data subject still has a right to have human intervention. So if I don't like a decision that's been made by the computer about me, if it says, no, I can't have something, or no, I'm not being shortlisted for an interview, I'm able to go back to that business and say, I want a human to look at that decision. I don't want a machine decision. So again, it's not a new thing. I think it's now evolving probably more. We're using them better now. And the new data user access bill is giving us that. It's giving us this, isn't it? It's giving us more definition around what we should be doing.
So it's also relaxed it a little bit for businesses as well, because it's enabled them to use legitimate interest.
Yeah, instead of consent.
For the automated decision making, but it's then also given the caveat that human insight needs to be there should the data subject access it, the data subject request it.
Yeah.
So that they have that fairness involved as well.
Yeah. So there's a few to learn about there.
Next one for you guys. What real operational risks do rights like erasure, rectification, restriction, portability, and objection pose to small and medium-sized enterprises in particular?
So we touched on this just a second ago, and it is important because cost is a real driver for most organisations. We're in tough financial times. What's it actually going to cost to do some of these requests? When it's a little bit like a DSAR, I guess. They all so interlinked. When one lands in your email and one comes through the post, your heart sinks and you're like, this is going to be a compliance nightmare. And we get it all the time. Our clients come to us all the time with their head in their hands. So timing and cost are huge again. Compliance timing, because the legislation actually says that all of these enhanced rights should be done as soon as practically possible. That's the wording that's used, practically possible. What does that really mean? It doesn't give us a defined timescale. Whereas with the DSAR, it says a calendar month.
Yeah.
So we know what that means. However, the ICO's view, and really the approach we're taking in the UK, is that we're trying to stick to that one calendar month the same for the enhanced rights because we think that's good practice. So whilst the legislation doesn't define that, a month again is only 20 working days. In terms of if you're retrieving information from archives, you're calling boxes back from Iron Mountain, that takes days, it costs money, it takes resource, and then someone's got to sit and filter through paper documentation. Then you're looking at your electronic files. The delays around this are huge. It's a big ask.
And then also, if you're doing a DSAR at the same time and they've asked for the dates to be erased, you have to do one before you do the other, which can then delay it as well. So you need to extend it under that caveat.
And if you don't meet the timescales, or if you're delaying, stalling, you're going to lose confidence from the data subject. They're going to think you're stalling, perhaps. So there are all these knock-on effects from, being. It's quite a regulated process, but it's so timely. It costs such a lot to put a lot of resource into it. It takes time, and especially where you're an organisation that's been going for a long time and you might still be paper heavy. That's a bit of a compliance nightmare, I think, really. So timing's big, and cost.
Cost, yeah. You've got your cost of the retrieval. You've got your resources for doing it, and then you've also got the cost of non-compliance. That's a risk cost that you need to consider, that if you don't do this or you do it wrong, what's the impact to your business from a cost perspective?
Yeah. What's the regulator going to say? Are we going to get a fine because we didn't delete a record? It took us 7 months to delete a record, for example, because we perhaps couldn't find it, or whatever that might be. Another common thing we have as well, fragmented systems. So a lot of organisation systems don't talk to each other. So they'll have lots of different platforms that are not communicating with each other. So in terms of locating data, if someone puts in an Article 17 for a deletion request and you delete it from 90% of the systems, but you've missed some, and then they put in the data subject access request later and they find that you still have data on your systems, how does that, what happens there from a compliance perspective? Because you failed to meet your obligations under Article 17, the ICO is going to find out, they're going to say, how did you miss that? So processes, really important, making sure that you've got everything mapped out, data mapping. Europa should help you with this, shouldn't it? So telling you, where information is and on what systems, because missing it, and not passing this information on to your third-party vendors. They've still got the data, perhaps as sub-processors. You've deleted it from your master systems. A subject access will flush that out. And most people, certainly in mine and Aim's experience, most people, when they've asked for something to be deleted, will follow up months later with a subject access request because they're testing you, because they want to know, did you do what I asked you to do in the first place? So they'll catch you out. So you have to be absolutely on it. Record keeping gaps. So
poor housekeeping will impact all of these things that we're talking about. If you're not deleting stuff within your retention periods, if you're not mapping stuff out so you know where your data is being kept, if you're not just generally housekeeping it well, then it's just going to come back and bite you.
Yeah, absolutely. And everything, I talk about this all the time with clients. Everything is pivotal around your ROPA. Everything in the GDPR, your ROPA, if you have a good ROPA with all of your information on, it will help you to do all of these processes, all of the enhanced rights, because it will tell you where you need to go for everything and who's got access to it and what systems it's sat on and how long you're keeping it for. Someone might make a request and say, I worked with you 10 years ago, I'd like you to delete my records. You'll be able to go to your ROPA and go, well, we deleted everything after 6 years, so we no longer retain that information. So it will help you to get a quick response to someone. Actually, we can't action your Article 17 request because we already deleted your data in line with our retention periods 3 years ago. Easy. Got rid of the data subject. If you don't have good retention periods, you don't have a good ROPA, it's a bit of a compliance nightmare. It's a huge administrative burden, isn't it, for most organisations?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing to consider is the security, not just on your data. Obviously, that needs to be secure because then if it's breached, you've got a problem. But when you're sending information to data subjects, when you're sending information to your vendors, security is another issue that can cause non-compliance for any of the rights.
Yes. And we still have a number of clients who quite happily email over, just general email, full of really sensitive information, attachments that are perhaps not password protected. They're not using any official information security wrapping around that, those data transfers. Again, huge non-compliance. They should be looking at data transfer impact assessments. They should be looking at how they're doing that. They should be looking at the security around it. And again, back to the ROPA, always comes back to the ROPA. That would tell you how you should be sharing that information, what security you're doing with that, whether you're sending it via WeTransfer, secure portals, even password protecting attachments, for example. We know hackers are great now. Data could be intercepted in transit. So we need to, obviously that it's really important.
And then with the main rights as well of the portability, if you are doing data portability, especially now that the doer has increased the possibility for other industries outside of banking, if you're transferring those files under the data portability, then security is a massive.
Huge, yeah. The NHS have had issues there with data portability, people moving cross-county. Yeah. So they want one GP surgery to have their records to another GP surgery, and they were just emailing them, and they weren't using the proper NHS secure portal. So you imagine someone's full medical record is in the ethos somewhere, potentially being intercepted. And lost,
special category.
Huge, yeah. I mean, the fine around that is, this is, it would be massive if some, an NHS practice gets that wrong. It's catastrophic, really. So, yeah, no, it's important security.
So, again, sort of looking at SMEs.
Yep.
How can a small or mid-market business recognise success in handling these rights without drowning in process complexity?
Well, everything needs to have a process.
But keep it simple.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't have to be difficult, then, does it really? It just has to be pragmatic and don't keep records for longer than you need them. Make sure everybody's trained and knows what they should be doing. Make sure you have simple processes and everyone understands everybody should be trained in all of these enhanced rights. Because even if you're not actually processing a right to erasure or a restriction, you need to recognise those. Everyone in the business, down to the receptionist, needs to know when someone says something and they may not use that terminology. We talked about this on the DSAR podcast, didn't we? Not everyone understands the terminology, so they may not ask you for a DSAR. They may just say something like, I want a copy of, or I want my data, or I know you hold this. You have to be able to recognise that. I want you to delete this record. They're not necessarily saying, under Article 17, I'm exercising my rights for erasure. They're not going to necessarily use that terminology. But yeah, like Aimee says, don't make it difficult. One page flows, making sure you've got good processes in place, making sure everyone's trained and knows what they should be doing.
Standard templates will also help if you have the bits that can be standardised and makes it simpler because you can just grab that standard template and send what you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. Clear system flags, that's really useful. A lot of organisations use those, in terms of being able to unsubscribe people from things, don't send information to them, restrict a record. Again, this comes down to software and systems and what you've got. If you've invested in high-end systems, you should have all these good functionality. Organisations don't. And to get these extras are bolt-ons to systems, which cost money. So perhaps they don't have that. So that, that can make it tricky. Vendor alignment, discussing things with third parties.
Yeah.
That in terms of cascading the message, someone, we're processing data in the business that's incorrect. We've passed that file to you. You also need to look at rectification as a sub-processor. I think a lot of organisations forget where their data has gone and who they've shared it with. That happens a lot. We find that quite a bit when we're doing subject access.
Third-party risk management, active in your due diligence, making sure that the agreements are in place with your third-party suppliers, and knowing who your third-party suppliers are just part of your third-party risk management that will help you when you're coming to do with these rights.
And how do you monitor that? I get this quite a bit from clients. They've got sub-processors and they've got data processing agreements in place between them and their sub-processors. But who's actually checking? So when we ask them to delete something, Joe Bloggs wants this file deleting, we tell our sub-processors and they say, yes, okay, we'll delete that from our systems. What are we doing about auditing that? It's really important because compliance, the secret seventh principle is around accountability. It's around evidencing that you have complied. Having processes in place is not enough. How do you evidence that you are doing what you say you're doing? So, we have clients who ask us to audit their sub-processors, and we go and we check their systems and we check the data's been deleted automatically after 6 years, or that a subject access or a right to erasure has been followed all the way through down the chain to make sure that's done. So that's important too, to actually evidence your compliance, not just saying you do it, evidence that you do it. So it's important. Calm comms, yeah, that's a good one. So timely, plain language. So making sure that you are communicating really clearly, making sure everyone in the business understands everything that should be happening, keeping the data subject up to speed with everything that you're doing is really important. Forge that relationship with your data subject, because actually when you have those conversations with them, you can usually find out what's driving this. People don't put in a request for something or an enhanced rights unless something is bothering them. They've probably got an issue with your organisation. They're upset with maybe the service they've received or whatever it might be. Could be an ex-employee, wants their employee record deleted. It may be that they've left under a cloud and it's not a great situation. So, making sure you're keeping everything calm, keep a relationship going. Think about what the implications are going to be if this escalates into a complaint to the commissioner. So how are you managing that? You need to be able to say to the commissioner, we've kept the data subject in the loop. This is how we're processing it. This is what we're doing. So keeping a record of all of your communications is really important.
Internal communication is good as well. If you've got something, say for a bigger organisation, maybe like the NHS, where there is something that has happened that is going to hit the public domain, anticipating rights coming in on the back of it. When something has happened that will trigger people to say, oh, I don't want them to have my data anymore. I don't want them to do this. And they will then come in. Internal communication to the people within your organisation will allow them to know that those things possibly could come in and then be prepared for them, which will enable the communication with those data subjects to be calm and not panic.
Get your PR department involved where you need to, manage the fallout from that. Because, we talked about this a little bit with data subject access request. It's not just the regulatory fines that are an issue, it's your lack of customer confidence. So when something breaks, your business could be crippled not by a fine, but by lack of anybody wanting to work with your business again.
Reputation.
Reputational damage is massive and could be way more costly than a fine. So, it is important to be prepared and ready for that as well.
What common pitfalls can cause unnecessary headaches or regulatory red flags when dealing with these rights?
I think the most common one is exactly the same. I keep coming back to data subject access requests because they're also interlinked. Over-promising and under-delivering is a real problem. And we still have a number of clients who say, we can turn this around in 2 days. And we're like, that's not going to happen. I think over-promising, saying things like, we have retention schedules and everything gets deleted after 6 months, or we delete, most common one, we delete CVs after 6 months if you've not been successful. When you audit that process, it doesn't happen in reality. A CV will come into a business to maybe a HR department or maybe a contracts manager who will then say, well, there's no positions in my department, but actually this person sounds really great, so I'm going to share that with 3 or 4 other senior colleagues. Suddenly that CV is on 3 or 4 different emails. It's in your inbox. It's in your sent items. It's in your delete box. It's everywhere. Someone's printed it off. There's a copy in HR. Before you know it, you've got 20 copies of someone's CV. So then when that person is unsuccessful in a role, so let's say they go through the recruitment process and they're unsuccessful, and they ask you to delete everything, how are we making sure that happens? So be careful what you promise to data subjects, because if you don't have a good process in place, then actually you're non-compliant. So don't make promises, because you're going to slip up when they put in a subject access request and the systems are searched and suddenly all these CVs pop up in everybody's inbox.
Yeah. I'm going back to the poor housekeeping. One of the biggest pitfalls is if you're not doing the right housekeeping, keeping a track of your data, and doing all of the right things, then it's gonna cause you a problem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Opinions as well. Treating opinions as facts, that trips up a number of our clients regularly. In subject access requests, opinions about someone is disclosable. So it does get incorporated into a data subject access request, but we have to be careful with how that scope creep goes across some of the other rights. So that's worth sort of considering as well when you're looking at when you're making guarantees to a data subject about what you're prepared to do for the enhanced right. Just be careful what you commit to as well there. So it isn't a straightforward process.
No. And it's not a blanket process.
No, it isn't. It's a case by case. Again, it's always case by case, though, isn't it? I think, the GDPR isn't black and white. it gives us guidance, but it allows us flexibility to do things a little bit differently. So we could both be processing the same thing and actually come up with a different outcome. So because how we interpret what the legislation asks us to do can make a difference. Sloppy work as well. Yeah, that's another one. Not having good everything goes back to good housekeeping.
Yes, actually, that's your headliner, isn't it? Keep it
simple.
And keep it simple.
Yeah,
will make life easier.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm a big believer that the GDPR is a lot of common sense. So if you approach your business practices in a common sense way, you won't keep data longer than you need because it's costly. It's difficult. We don't want to have data offsite. We don't want to have reams and reams of backups of data. Get rid of it if you no longer need it. It's quite an obvious thing to say. Delete records when you no longer need them. Keep people up to date with things. It's very straightforward. Treat people how you would expect to be treated. If you were the data subject, exactly. Yes, if this was your data that someone was processing about you, would you be happy with your business processes? Because if you wouldn't, if it was a process you were offering to someone's mother, for example, would you want your mother to be treated that way? How would you want that person to know about what's happening with their data and to have access to that and to be able to make changes and have control? And fundamentally, that's one of the biggest drivers for the GDPR when it came in. And the Data Protection Act of 2018 is around giving back power and control to the data subject. Huge driver about saying the data subject gets to have more say about what happens and when and how and by who around their information. So it all interlinks. It's all very common sense, isn't it? In reality.
Another pitfall would be not ensuring that we're back to the security, not ensuring that the person who's made that request is the person that they say they are. You don't just need to do that with data subject access requests, but you do need to do that with other rights as well. They've asked for something to be corrected. Are they the person who has the right to do that? If they've asked for something to be moved, are they the person who's got the right to do that? Always checking that you're dealing with the right person falls into your security things as well.
Yeah. Because anyone could make a request. I want this record to be deleted. I am who I say I am. You delete a record, it could be an ex-employee causing you trouble. It could be a relationship breakdown and a partner's making a request about someone else. Happens quite a lot on your parking.
Yeah.
With a number of parking clients that we work with where individuals may use someone's parking movements to track where they're located.
Financial records, all records
as
well. The partner will be trying to get hold of that information. And I've experienced that where a disgruntled ex-partner was trying to get information and they even had their ID. They even tried to prove that they were that person, and it was just due diligence that we spotted that coming through.
Yeah, and it happens more than you know, actually, doesn't it? We see that's the sort of, I guess that's the sexy side of this, is that actually data protection, people think it could be quite boring, but actually in some businesses it's quite interesting. What the length some people will go to get hold of information. Yeah. There's always a story.
Get your popcorn up.
There's always a story.
Brilliant.
Pull up a chair. It's going to be fun.
Fab. I think we've got time for one more quick one.
Okay.
So this is again that question of a business's reputation and customer relations. So in real world terms, how can businesses balance customer empowerment through data rights with maintaining smooth, cost-effective operations?
That's almost 100% impossible to do, but we try every day. Yeah, it's tricky because cost-effective operations, that's always tricky. And the biggest question we get asked probably every day is, what's it going to cost me to do this? And how long's a piece of string? And we can't answer that because who knows how big something's going to be until we know. You don't know until you know. And the work that goes into finding that out. So cost effectiveness is difficult. I think the key thing for me is if you have a real good organizational structure and you have teams that all interlink in these processes, having a good relationship between the departments, so almost an SLA between the teams, to make sure. So IT, 90% of our clients, when they do, when a request comes in, whatever type of request, they have to go to the IT department to search the systems because that's their central point for the most access for finding where anything's located within the business. So you want a good relationship with that team. They need to understand why it's important to you in your department. And, you need to understand they have a full-time job to do as well. And you're asking them to, you're loading them with something else. So building strong links with different departments is quite key, really, for being compliant. Everyone needs to work together. This is not just one department's responsibility.
Yeah.
People think, in Article 17, I want my record deleted, and all that data protection, will send it to them. It doesn't just sit with them. We can facilitate that. We can look at the process. We can engage the right departments, but a number of other teams need to get involved in that to enable it to happen. So that's really important.
I think it's essential that the data protection department or lead or officer or whoever's in charge of that has a good relationship with all departments, not just for when they need to exercise those rights for data subjects, but also back to your privacy by design. When processes are being put in, when new systems are being put in, the very first thought in everyone's mind should be, what data protection impact is there? Go to your data lead, and then they start to help you make sure that those things are implemented, which will help you down the line when you do come to do that erasure or that rectification or that data subject access request. It's already built in. It makes life easier 10, 12 months, years down the line, because it's already been done at the very first point. And that if that data protection team lead officer is approachable and engaged with all of the other departments, that will then make their life easier to get that privacy by design in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And another key thing as well, and I say this to my clients regularly, is around setting expectations for the data subject. Because if somebody asks for a HR record to be deleted, they worked for your organisation 3 years ago, and they want their whole HR file deleting, you need to manage their expectations, because there's likely to be another piece of legislation somewhere that says, actually, no, we need to retain it for this period of time. And on that basis, you're going to be saying no to that request. So manage that early on. Don't dawdle. Don't take time. Be very clear and say, it's likely that we've either already deleted your record or that we're going to have to refuse the request because your payroll records are in there and we are mandated to retain that information for this period of time. And that means our system will retain your employment record for this period. So manage expectations, don't make any promises, speak to different departments, look at what your ROPA says in terms of how long we're back to the ROPA again, how long are we keeping the data for and why? Because on the ROPA, it will tell us why we're keeping it. What's the legislation that says we need to retain? So it's important to be open and transparent. Principle one, everything is so heavily interlinked, it all comes back. That's really important. Standardizing responses,
say that.
Templates,
getting some templates in place that can be amended for those necessary case by case bits, but you've got that wording already there. You've got the legislation marked for that particular bit to say, this is why we can't do that, and also having those systems like you can use systems like OneTrust that can help you to manage those data subject rights requests so that you can follow it through, how long timescale is, what's been done so far. So we've sent this email to the data subject, we've gone to this department. You can track and manage those as well, can really help. So automating some of those bits can help to save time and make it more efficient.
Yeah. I guess there's a cost around some of the softwares and systems, but it's how you balance that. If you're getting a lot of these types of requests coming in, then perhaps the investment in a piece of software is really useful. Otherwise, some clients of ours, they use spreadsheets that just literally count the days down. This was received this date. This means the output has to be this date. So it is around, managing, and again, all down to good housekeeping is so important. Prioritizing highest risk flows. So in terms of priorities, refusal for marketing or wanting to unsubscribe is really important. The ICO's view on this is quite firm. So if somebody wanted to see me deleting or somebody wanted to unsubscribe from marketing material, the ICO would fall on the marketing material every day of the week and say that's more important because it's around those individuals' rights.
We've got the PEPA involved as
well. Another piece of legislation that comes in, that will then, obviously have an impact on priority. So it's important that an organisation understands risk management on what the ICO's view is on what they think is business critical and what should be happening faster than others. because you might think that something's really important, that you need to do it this particular way, but actually it could well be that the ICOs is quite relaxed about that, but around this, they're not so relaxed about. And that's because other pieces of legislation start to creep in as well, don't they? So it has an impact on that, really. I think in my view, everything is obvious. It's common sense. It's about good housekeeping. It's about getting your house in order, understanding where everything is, making sure your team know where everything is and understand how to recognise. So good training around all of these enhanced rights. And I always say to my customers, there's nothing wrong to say, to refuse these. It's okay to say, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to do that. I think some of our clients get a little bit like, well, I don't really like to say no, I'm worried about what the ICO will say. But sometimes you can push back on some of these, and these are not given rights. So it isn't always that you have to say yes, like a DSAR, where you have to comply unless you can find an exemption. These you can say no, because you may have a business need for some of these. And that's not wrong if you can evidence what that is. So be pragmatic, get your house in order, understand where everything is, get everybody trained, and you should be 90% of your way to compliance before you start.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. That was a really interesting discussion. If any of our listeners would like to ask Aimee or Rachael a question for a future episode, there's going to be a link in the description of this episode. If you just follow that link, fill out the form, then you can send a question over to us, or you can just put a comment at the bottom of this episode, and hopefully Aimee and Rachael will have a chance to pick it up in the future. But thank you so much, guys, and thank you everyone.
Thanks, Annie.
Today.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.